AI finally enters the conversation, and maybe the ecosystem.
My background's very much in environmental science, so I've been in the industry for about 20 years.
From hydrographer to digital innovator, Matthew O'Brien is on a mission to make AI work for the planet. With AI for Enviros.
And Enviros is the slang for environmental scientists in Australia. In environmental science, you're always working with data which is messy.
But can we really code our way to a cleaner planet?
NVIDIA can only build a finite amount of GPUs. That actually puts a hard barrier on growth. Machine learning has been a really fundamental part of science and engineering. Some examples are object detection in images, species identification in images, because, for example, ecologists work with tens of thousands, sometimes millions of images, which they've got from camera traps and things like that. So if you've got something you're interested in, just put it out there, because you just never know where things are going to lead up.
Hello guys, and welcome to the new episode of Ecosystemic. We couldn't avoid AI longer, so it had to come one day. My guest Matthew O'Brien will take us through a journey where AI meets environment, hopefully for the best. So hi Matthew.
Hi Raouf, how are you? Thanks for having me along.
For those who don't know you, can you just give us like a brief overview of your journey, because it's very interesting?
Yeah, so I've got a bit of a mix of I'm a science generalist, so my background's very much, even though I'm here to talk to you about AI, my background's very much in environmental science. So I've been in the industry for about 20 years, and it's been a real mixed bag of different things. I started off as a hydrographer, so they deal with surface water resources and measuring flows in catchments and water supplies and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time in my early career doing that. And then I got into ecotoxicology. So I was working with bugs a lot. So I used to use insects in freshwater environments as indicators of ecosystem health. So I did that. I was involved in research at a university doing that. And I did like an honours research project there and published a paper on that. And then after that, I moved into contaminated land consulting. Dealing in dirty places like service stations and, pulling tanks out of the ground, and so some other cool stuff too, like lots of travel. Like I got to go around Australasia quite a bit traveling, and doing environmental assessments and stuff like that. I've also worked in small business. So I worked in like an environmental technology company, and that was doing a lot of marine and work with land and landfills and things like that. But I also did sort of marine and estuarine work, and that was very technology focused. So that must have been a little more than 10 years ago. And that's when I started getting into the digital space. We were working on a large landfill project, and it was a big digital transformation project for that particular landfill. And so that's really what got me interested in the role that sort of digital tools play in my industry, and the sort of potential efficiencies that it can bring, but also the problems and the barriers of people adopting those technologies too. And then after that, I traveled for a year in South America. I just quit my job and traveled through South America and sort of learnt Spanish and had a great time. And then when I came back from there, I worked on a major infrastructure project in Melbourne as part of a hydrogeology team as a sub-consultant with a larger consultancy. And that was a new subway in Melbourne in Australia. So during that experience working on that project, all these large language models started to come along. So, ChatGPT was launched. I think it's probably more than 2 years ago now. And I started using that technology quite early on, and I found it to be a real amplifier for me, for a person who's non-technical. I know a bit of programming, enough to sort of be dangerous, but in no way would I call myself a programmer. But it was able to amplify certain things that I wanted to do. So all of a sudden, I was able to build things which I would normally have to get another team to do for me. And it came out of necessity in a way, because I had support from teams to build digital tools, but they were really busy at one time. So I just had to figure it out. And I was amazed how quickly I could figure it out by using these new large language models as a knowledge amplifier, essentially. So when I finished up on that project, that was about 6.5 years that I worked on that project, and I'd had enough. I was a bit burnt out from it, and I just had an idea about, I'm a consultant, I'm an environmental scientist. I've made great use of this technology in a very real and practical way, but I didn't know anyone else doing it, really using it practically like that at the time. So I think I'm going to go test to see whether there's other environmental scientists out there who can also use this technology like me. So that's how my business was born, which I've been going at for about 14 months now. And that business is called AI for Enviros. So I'm working mostly at a macro level with other scientists and engineers, basically just trying to help them to find real ways of using this technology in their work. So that's basically me. The other thing I was just going to say, the other thing which is relevant, which I thought I might say, which plays into this, which is an important part to touch on, is that I'm also a musician, and I have a long history in electronic music and live electronic music production, and it's all very tech based, and so it's a real overlap with what I do in my professional life in terms of that kind of the way that you use digital tools which help you be creative. So that anyway, that's something we can touch on a bit later.
That's great. Like we are increasing our pool of musicians, singers, DJs, etc. As we may end up having like a music festival at one point.
That sounds good to me. I'm always up for a festival.
You didn't really quit your previous job to start this venture, right?
I chose not to continue working as a consultant and just focusing on this because, even though I'd been self-employed for quite some years as like a contractor, I never really started my own business. So I decided to not do what I was doing as an environmental consultant and just to try something completely new. But that involves learning all the sort of business stuff you need to learn, and you're really inexperienced in that. So it's like I decided to just focus on that, and I've been just focusing on this venture for the last 14 months.
What was the switch to go from the academic world to the corporate world? Working in a lab for a scientist is a kind of safe zone.
It was around doing things which were applied. So I always found pure science a little bit hard because I had to see the application of what I was doing. And so when you're working on pure science and you're doing research, it's not always obvious what the practical application is of what you're doing. And so once I'd finished an honours degree, and then I got employed, some short-term employment to do a publication, and then I did that. And then after I did my first publication, I actually started a PhD, and I lasted 2 weeks, and then I was like, it's not me. Like I got to do something different. I still think I might actually do a PhD, but maybe when I'm like retired. I think that's the plan. But at that point, yeah, I was just really interested in the applied side of things. I wanted to see real world results, and that was really the main driver. Yeah, I didn't really know what I was getting myself in for because it was extremely different to working in academia. So it was quite a shock. But but that was the reason.
You took 1 year off to visit Latin America. What was the main difference?
The main difference, in the very obvious sense, the language. So for me, that was a big. That sounds silly to say that, but that's actually a big part of the experience for me. Because when you're learning another language and you're learning another culture, and learning a language helps you learn the culture. So that was probably the first thing, even if it does sound like an obvious thing. But I think just more in Australian culture, we're quite rules based. Everyone loves a good rule here, in Australia. So even though the reputation might be that Australians are pretty relaxed, and we actually like quite a culture of like there's a certain way to do things and you follow the rules and stuff. So I guess there was that was a bit different. That's a bit different, So it was a lot more loose in Central and South America. So that was probably the second thing. Yeah.
Fast forward to the present, and you founded AI for Enviros. Do you pronounce the S or not? Is it Enviro or Enviros?
So Enviros is Australian slang for environment. So so what it means is that it's AI for environmental scientists, and Enviros is the slang for environmental scientists in Australia. So it's using Australian slang. I've had this question a couple of times from anyone outside of Australia.
In a nutshell, can you give like a quick overview of what you do, obviously with AI and environment?
So when I started off, really the first, I think 6 or 7 months, I actually didn't even have a business name. I was out there doing like industry research, really. So I was doing presentations. I had this series called AI Not Excel. It was just simply showing how to solve problems with large language models that you would normally use Excel for. Everyone uses Excel in environmental science, and engineers, they love it. So it's where scientists and engineers spend a lot of their time. So that was for me an obvious place to start to see if I could gauge interest. So because my love is data, I love working with data. So that's where I started. So after I did that, that generated enough interest for me to think that, okay, well, it's still worth, continuing with this and see if I can actually get some paid clients doing this. And the first two engagements that I had were around building like AI tools, which did certain things with data. So they were generally simple things like merging files together or transforming a file somehow so that you can do something with it. Because in environmental science, you're always working with data which is messy. It's messy, it's disconnected, it's incomplete. So you spend so much of your time trying to make it all fit together so that you can tell a story with it. So the first two clients were building these tools, and that was just using ChatGPT because these clients had business licenses for that particular package. So the first two clients, pretty much from things ranging from merging your data, maybe data correction tools, data visualization tools, things like that. But it was a sort of a bit too niche. At that time, I wasn't getting enough interest by people who were really, wanted that kind of work done for them, or they didn't want those kind of skills built in their teams, or they didn't understand it enough. So I ended up moving into doing some more advisory strategic work around the risks of adopting AI. And I just want to be clear, like when I'm saying AI, I mean large language models. So this is where I've been focusing in the last 12 to 14 months. And so helping businesses to understand the commercial risk of taking this technology on board, like what do they need to be aware of? There's laws in Europe. There's also progressing laws in Australia. The federal government has a national AI centre, so they have guidance which they provide to industry, but almost no one's aware of it. And there's also emerging like management systems and stuff like that, ISO management systems. So I did a bit of that. And then more recently, I worked with local government to help them with facilitation sessions to think about the ways that they can use this technology without wasting their time, essentially. So helping them understand that it's like you got to use it for the right task. It's not good for all tasks. And coming into what we're talking about as part of our conversation today around the sustainability side too, I've had a lot of questions about, what does it mean? Like, how sustainable is this technology? I keep hearing it uses a lot of energy. I keep hearing it uses a lot of water. And I wasn't actually sure. And when I went out to try and find information, it was very variable. And I think it's still very incomplete at the moment. But there is a bit of a story building in terms of what it all means and how to keep track of it.
How was the initial adoption of AI tools in the environment sector? For me, it makes sense when I see that you work mainly with Excel, you handle tens of thousands of rows of data. Working with these kind of data introduce bias. Like, you can't be unbiased at 100%. You can always tweak your data to make them say what you would like them to say. And for me, like, AI could be like a tool to build an unbiased result. Well, at least not biased by the researcher. It's the bias is elsewhere. But have you seen like this kind of appetite for AI because of these reasons, or not at all?
I mean, what I'm really seeing is that I can only speak for my industry because I haven't been looking outside of my industry. So I think there could be a lot going on, and I'm quite Australia specific, even though I have networks of other engineers and scientists who I've been speaking to in the US and other parts of the world. But the reality is at the moment, at least from what I'm seeing, is that there's not a lot of really technical work being done with large language models. There's lots of technical work being done with traditional AI, like in what's called narrow AI, which is like more like machine learning and image recognition and all the things that are already integrated into our lives, like the lane tracking on our cars and AI in our phones and on the cameras and stuff. So obviously that's integrated into everything. But if we're talking specifically about the explosion of large language models, I'm only seeing very few people in my industry using them to any level of high technical level. It's all very quite basic. So I think this is an interesting thing at the moment. It's like it seems like there's a lot going on, and you see it out in social media and the news all the time and stuff like that. But that's just my experience. There are some people, and I've been actively seeking those people. There are some engineers who are doing some, really interesting stuff, and they've had a similar experience to myself, where it's like it's an amplifier, and they've got the same experience with me. Previously, I found it very hard to do very, very complex things at all. For example, using like the Python programming language, but now I do all sorts of stuff with it, and it's a very real benefit to me. And I think that'll really accelerate, going forward. But I can only really think of a handful of people that I've actually spoken to who are doing some really technical stuff.
How did you end up learning Python code?
So I learned the basics. So I've done basic Python courses, and so I understand it enough to, in the past, I understood the programming language enough to work with developers. And so I was in a more of a project manager role in that sense. So I would, if I was trying to achieve a goal, I would work with the data integration engineers or the programmers to get there. So sort of I learnt the language on both sides of the domain. I know how to speak environmental science, but I kind of learned how to speak a bit of programmer as well, so that you can make things happen. And I think the more that I've been using artificial intelligence for helping me with coding and stuff like that, that's naturally been helping me to build more familiarity with how to use it as well. Yeah, so sort of just a bit of as you're working your way through problems, trying to code things, you're picking things up along the way.
What would be the main difficulties or limitations that you had to face for AI adoption?
Probably 6 months ago, just I guess the fear around it, because you don't really understand it until you started using it. And I think as a general rule, it's an extremely impressive technology, and it's changing so quickly. Even now, the more you use it, the less impressed you are by what it can do. So and I think that's an important sort of thing that you need to do, because then your fear level starts to go down a bit, because you understand that it's not just a magic technology that's going to solve all your problems. It's actually got bounds, and it's got limitations in terms of how you can use it and what you can personally do with it. But I think other barriers, certainly cost. And even though you're looking at somewhere between $25 and $60, that adds up over a team. So there's a cost barrier as well. Yeah, so they're the two main ones that I've run into. And so it's just communicating effectively enough to get people to understand what the technology actually is and what it can do. Because we've got this sort of overarching word AI, and not everyone understands that there's so many different fields under that do different things. And the AI that they're thinking about is just this tiny little part called large language models.
It's time for a little self-promotion and introducing our new product. So, this show was brought to you by Zero, the last portable battery you will ever need. Zero is not only sustainable and repairable with no tools, it's also modular to fit your needs and your way of consuming energy. With Zero, you can add a flashlight, a tripod, more outputs, you name it. We have 20 plus add-ons and 20 plus color combinations. You can have it in all white, wood, glow in dark, or any other color to fit your personality and what you would like to have as a battery. Zero is not only a portable battery, it's a movement. By supporting Zero, you support your right for a more sustainable and responsible tech with repairable designs and products that are built to last as they are meant to be. To support us and get yours, you can go on nomorezero.com or go.nomorezero.com if you want to know more about the product. Don't forget, go.nomorezero.com.
And yes, I think like now people are confusing really large language models with AI. These two words mean the same thing for the majority. Like if I ask a non-technical person, give me a name of an AI, it will be ChatGPT. I don't know if you agree. I've noticed that the trend for AI adoption in the corporate world went from, oh, I don't want to take these tools. I don't want to adopt these tools because A, it may take my job, or B, it may force my team to work less because they will rely on it to do things on their behalf, up to now the trend moved to I need to integrate AI in my, let's say, like technical stack as a company because this is the new cool. All the companies need to have AI in their suite of software. And I see this around me, like, all the big corporate that we work with, etc. They are all awkwardly integrating AI, and their teams, they wake up in the morning and they see, oh, they took the AI of X, Microsoft, the AI of Y, etc. And it's like at almost a damage control. Like they don't communicate on it. Like you wake up in the morning and it pops like, okay, you will have like an upgrade to this AI and now you need to use it. And is it the same for you in Australia where you see like people going from being afraid to being super hyped, and as a company, of course, not as an individual person?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely this year in 2025. I'm just really seeing it's becoming a lot more common. And it's just like you say, it's in integration without really much forethought into what that means and whether it's because there's a very real possibility that it's not going to give you any benefit. But it depends what you do. But of course, there's so many people around saying, oh, no, it's going to, people guaranteeing 1,000% return on time and all this kind of stuff. But it's actually like, it's a lot more modest than that. Like all the trials which I've seen, which have been, and pilots which have been undertaken by companies, all seem to end up at about the same kind of like 4 hours a week, for general use if you're using this technology. And I'm like, that doesn't sound that impressive, but it's actually measurable. So it's still worth it, but perhaps not worth it to the scale which they're being sold at this point. Yeah, but I've definitely seen it pick up this year for sure. It's just it seems to be a lot more common, and everyone's just trying to figure out how to make this work because there's no real roadmap. If you go out and do some research on what's an integration strategy for your company and your employees, there's no definitive rule book on this. Everyone's trying to figure it out.
And how would you get the best from AI as an amplifier?
I'm just trying to think of a good example for that. Well, I mean, even just for this particular podcast. So, I didn't have that much time to put something together, but I generally like to be quite well prepared. So I used a combination of my own research and some some data scientists that I knew of who, were reporting on climate, but I also used a couple of AI agents to go out and do some research for me. So I sent you a report to look at, and that was an AI agent report. So I didn't write that. I didn't read it till after I sent it to you. It was just something to give context and a broader thing. So I think what it can do in the sense of researching something, it can allow you to gather a lot more things together more quickly than you would have done it in the past. Another good example is like I use it to help find contract jobs. If I'm looking for specific like contract roles or something which might suit my company, I'll get an agent to do that. I'll get AI to do that. So it's amplifying the number of resources I can gather. A second example is around learning with things like when you're coding, you can use the sort of limited skill you've got, but you can also use your own natural language to just talk things through to solve a problem with programming. It's amplifying the little bit of skill you've got to achieve things which you couldn't do before. So before I was doing everything myself in Excel, and then with the advent of AI, I was off building like my own Power BI dashboards for the project that I was on with the assistance to do that from AI. And then I was also partially developing Python tools to do data analysis to help with some of the deliverables for the reports in that project too. So it's just kind of taking a little bit which I knew and allowing me to do something more with it. And I think I was going to say I've got an example of that too, which I can share around, and it's the reason why I think I've stopped and not done so much data work in the business. It's because I think I underestimated my own baseline knowledge of programming and working in the technical domain of like trying to build things. And I thought that it would be much easier to have that other scientists could just do it too if they didn't have any programming knowledge whatsoever. So I've found that without a bit of domain expertise in a particular area, it can be a bit limiting under some circumstances. It's a technology where it's more useful to someone who has a very strong domain experience, so that it can amplify more. I mean, that's clear with just, people who already are expert coders make very good use of the technology because they don't want to write all the code themselves anyway. So they've got the expert knowledge to check it and do the more sort of advanced parts of it. But in terms of just writing blocks of code, almost every programmer that I know is using it a lot.
Yeah. Plus, AI works like a magic trick. As long as you watch it and you respect the rules, you are in the audience on the front, you are impressed. But if you get to go on the behind the curtain and see how the magic trick works, well, you are less impressed and you will never see the trick the same way again. So I don't know if it's the same thing for you.
Yeah, I think, one of my examples was like, I thought, this is great. I was doing all these great production of graphs and analysis and all this fantastic stuff. But the more that I used it, the more one of the examples of the limitations that I ran into was this thing called context window size. And that means that there's an amount of text which you can put into a large language model, but there's also a text that it can give you back. And if you exceed that, that can be really problematic for if it's writing a long chunk of code to do something cool for you. If it reaches the end of that context window, no more. It doesn't write anymore. So it won't tell you that. So that's actually quite a big limitation. And until I'd used it a lot and understood it, I was like, oh, this means I actually can't do a lot of things which I was wanting to do. So all of a sudden, it was very restricted at that time for me. And I'm like, okay, now I understand why you still need programmers, to take this out of the system and do it in a more traditional way in a coding notebook or something like that. And I think you're sort of running into that too, as you're using it more for writing, and you'll kind of find these barriers that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I've said previously that I don't think that AI will take people's jobs. Well, I need to correct this. I think that it may even now take many juniors positions, like assistant positions, things like this, where people feel like, oh, I don't need to pay somebody to do this on my behalf.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt it's going to cost jobs, but there's, I think based on technical innovations in history, it's also guaranteed that there's going to be jobs created. To what extent, we don't know. I can't give you the exact figure, but I was reading up about jobs in when the Second World War ended in 1945, and I was like, I wonder how many of those jobs exist now. And it was actually quite a small proportion. I think, only 40% of jobs from back then, don't quote me on that, but it was something around that range. And it was 40% of jobs exist now that did then. So it's like my expectation would be that the same thing would happen. But I feel like design jobs are quite, certain aspects of design jobs could be a bit at risk, because like you said, because of all the image generation and, the ability to make product shoots. And actually it's getting very sophisticated what you can do with like photographs. I was using one of Google's products in their Google AI Studio, and you can actually put a photo in there of yourself and you can just get it to change what clothes you're wearing. And then you just give it the instructions to do that. It's not perfect yet, but it's actually really, really close. So just things like that. It made me think. I was like, I used to pay for photographers and stuff with my music, when I was doing that kind of thing, if we were doing promotional shots. But I'm like, I'm not sure if I'd do that now. I think there's probably enough for me to work with, to do something which is good enough using this technology in that way. So that kind of really made me think in the whole image space.
Yes, and we started talking about like how people working in the environment use AI in their daily life and daily job, but are they also taking in consideration how AI impacts the environment?
Well, I've done a lot of sort of technical presentations and demonstrations, over the last year or 14 months. And I think every presentation generally had a question about environmental impact and what that is. And actually, I had no idea, really. So but I think it's definitely been a consistent theme, particularly in my area that I work in as well. It's quite common for companies to have their own emissions policies and sustainability policies and, offsets and things like that. And, even recently, I actually built a tool to help calculate carbon emissions for a small consultancy. And that kind of made me realize, I think this gives them a ballpark, but I think I certainly wasn't confident that it was exactly correct, put it that way, which was the fun part about doing a bit of research for this chat.
Well, just to clarify, like, who is your typical client?
So they're like an environmental consultancy. They might be a small consultancy who does a specific niche like ecology, or they might do contaminated land assessment and remediation. They might be a size business between up to 60 people who do environmental sales or rental, maybe a bit of consulting. And then there's larger multinationals, they're science and engineering firms, 50, 60,000 employees that are spread around the globe. So I've worked with sort of all three of those. And then the other one is like a local council, local government as well. But they'll all be, generally I'm working with people who are in that sort of sustainability and environmental science space, but it's just whether it's in a commercial context or whether it's in a more of a government role.
And when it comes to sustainability of AI, is it also a limitation to adopting AI tools to think that, oh, like right now, there is no sustainable alternative to the existing models, etc. Therefore, I would not participate. I would not take part to this movement, which is, I don't know if you saw like Sam Altman's comment on the climate impact of people saying thank you to ChatGPT. But is it like also one of the company's concerns?
It's definitely a concern. It's a concern of lots of employees. There's no doubt about that, because the questions are there all the time. I haven't seen it like being as like so much of a concern that it would prevent them using the technology. Although I have seen some smaller companies where it has been, where they're like, we need to understand this because we've got. It was more around because they purchase offsets and they do start to have to run a carbon neutral business, and so they're like, well, like we just need to understand this before we adopt it and start. We don't just want to roll with it and then blow out our offsets or whatever's relating to their sustainability strategy. So I think there is a potential for sure. And, even with myself, if I'm perfectly honest, it's not just the environment side of things, it's the intellectual and how to interact with this technology. It's a bit of a love-hate relationship with me as well, because obviously, I'm in a business where I'm using it all the time, trying to figure out ways and learn how to use it. But I'm also quite wary of the impacts of that. And that's whether it's environmental or whether it could make my brain lazy if I'm overusing it, or becoming less original, or having less of my own style or something like that. But yeah, no, sustainability definitely plays a big part, I think.
Well, laziness, that's a big part for me, at least. I had this debate with my co-founder, like not only GPT, but other AI tools also would be like the new Wikipedia. For example, I have one GPT that I taught to mimic my writing style. And then I realized like, oh, if I overuse it, I might be like very lazy at the end, because I would like end up giving just instructions. But for me, as you said, it's sometimes a love and hate relationship, and I would end up losing even this spark of inspiration and not even having like the content to write about because I'm too lazy.
Because it relates to your individuality, like that's you as an individual are like what you output, that's how you talk, it's how you communicate. And I think because I wrestle with that too, because, I've been experimenting with getting it to write, automate reports and things like that. And I've done the same thing as you. It's like you just, you get it to write in your own style and you do things in a very specific kind of format. But sometimes even when I get to the end of it, and I feel like, oh, this is pretty good, but something doesn't feel right. And sometimes I just go back and just kind of really, because it doesn't feel right, I tend to just use it for a draft. Yeah. And then I work from there. It's really funny because sometimes I actually feel good. I'm just like, I know that's not grammatically correct, but I don't care because that's me, and so I'll just leave it in the report.
Also, maybe reading AI outputs push you to mimic the style of an AI, and therefore you are, raising all the flags for a AI detection tool to detect you as AI. I don't know if this happened to you. Or
I think my opinion is that like AI detectors don't work. That could also the simple result too. I mean, I think there's definitely something like ChatGPT will write in a fairly specific way if you don't give it much guidance. But I reckon that's also a possibility.
And to get back to the sustainability again, what's the current situation regarding AI and sustainability, going from the electrical consumption to the impact?
So I've done some research, and the problem at the moment is that there's not a lot of data. So any metrics we give, they're probably not going to be 100% correct. So we'll just acknowledge that now. But I've sort of done my best to go look for some what I consider to be fairly reputable people. So I've looked up some work by a woman called Hannah Ritchie. She's a data scientist at Our World in Data. And Our World in Data was created by a guy called Hans Rosling. And he wrote a book called Factfulness, and he was all about interpreting the world through numbers. So I think it's quite a reputable source. So I've tried to sort of go off and at least get some figures we can work with. But I think at its most sort of fundamental point, energy use of large language models at a macro level, so at the level in terms of our daily carbon footprint. Here in Australia, it's disappointingly high. I think it's probably around that 15, 16 tonnes a year, and maybe a bit less because we're scaling down a lot of solar. I think in France, yours would be a lot less than here because you've got a lot of nuclear in the grid. And Yeah, so I'm not sure what it would be, but I'd say it would be a lot less than that. But even so, as a proportion of your own yearly carbon footprint, using large language models is going to be an extremely small part of that. So if we look at like average daily power use per day, so if you look at the US, per person daily it's something like 34,000 watt hours per day. If you're living in the UK, it's less than that because there's a lot more renewables in the grid. It's probably about 12,000. So at present, with kind of the best rough information I can find, probably an average user of ChatGPT or something like that within a day, you might be using 30 watt hours to 300 watt hours in relation to your overall 12,000 or 34,000 watt hours per day. So it's a very small proportion at this stage of your overall daily use. So that's kind of where things stand. But of course, you have to acknowledge, as you said before, that if everyone uses it, then it's going to add up to something quite big. And so another fairly consistently reported fact was that obviously the energy is coming from data centers, and data centers have been around for a long time, since the internet kicked off. And data centers constitute around 1% to 2% of the world's power usage. And I think that figure was really reported in 2022. So that's really before the kickoff of all these large language models that were kind of released around that time. And so there's this question, I guess, around, well, it doesn't play a big part in my daily sort of footprint, but how much of it is it going to grow as a result of large language models? And that's kind of broadly where things stand, what I've been able to research anyway before this chat.
Is there for you any other impact beyond the electrical consumption of AI?
I mean, obviously people talk about water. I didn't get time to look into water. There was quite a lot to do with power. So I've really just focused on power. I think there's other parts of that to explore. So I don't have information on water. I can say that the reason that data centers use water is because once they get to a certain scale, they reach a capacity of air cooling. They can't, it's not a good enough transferring of heat. So the thing about computers that you've got to understand is that they're actually excellent. They're just heaters. Even though they do something cool when they process data, but if you put energy into chips, you lose 97% of that energy through heat. So they're actually these wonderful these wonderful heaters. So that's why they use so much power, and that's why they need the water to exchange that heat and take it away somewhere. Which is also worth thinking about too, because you're just like, well, if they're generating all this heat and they're just big heaters, why wouldn't you do something with that heat?
And that's the common sense. We should build all our data centers in cold countries and use them as heaters. And we solve two problems with one. What about the increase of chips, GPUs, manufacturing, etc., related to AI? Do you see this as a potential threat in the future? A, the access to the raw materials, and B, impact of these raw materials. And would you see this proliferation of AI everywhere as a potential threat for the environment, or humans as part of the ecosystem?
I might start with the first part you were talking about, because I think maybe some people don't understand what GPUs are and how they relate to large language models. So GPUs are graphics processing units, and they need those because that's where all the calculations go on with AI in the context of large language models. So to have lots of people accessing things like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot and stuff, you need a lot of GPUs, and not many companies make those GPUs, which is why NVIDIA shares go through the roof, because there's so much demand, which is an interesting point to bring up too, because of that demand. NVIDIA can only build a finite amount of GPUs. So that actually puts a hard barrier on growth in terms of how quickly these data centers can scale up to, specifically for large language models anyway. Obviously, data centers, like AI, is only a very small part of what data centers do. So that's another thing to understand. There's all this other stuff going on the internet, which is demanding power. Every time you have this conversation that we're recording now is going to use way more energy than using a large language model for a few days. So Zoom call and stuff like that. And that's all going through a data center. So that's probably the first point. So we're talking about data centers, which are required, but still that when we're talking about AI and large language models, they're a small part of that, which there's still some unknowns into how quickly it'll scale. But I think just because of that limitation of the absolute number of GPUs which can be produced, it's probably not going to be a really exponential growth. It's probably going to be more of a gradual growth on that. The second part you were talking about in terms of impact and resources and things like that, I did a little bit of reading on that in terms of the sort of the overall. Hannah Ritchie wrote another good article on sort of, renewables as a whole in terms of the amount of resources that's required to drive a renewable transformation, but that wasn't really related to AI. So I'm not really sure about the resources side of things.
And how would you see the evolution of AI and the adoption of AI for environmental research in the upcoming decade?
I couldn't tell you in 5 years.
Let's say in the upcoming 10 months, not 10 years.
I think in the upcoming year, I think what's changed a lot is that some people might have heard of the term agents, and I'm just going to explain that because it's not always an easy thing to understand what that means. So the way I've been trying to explain it to people is that if you're working with a large language model, you're generally trying to solve a problem. Like you're trying to get it to deliver a difficult email, or you're trying to get it to do something with your data. And because it's being trained on human data, you're interacting with it like a human. So you're having this conversation with it. And so once you've had lots of conversations with a large language model, you're like, I don't want to have this conversation every time I want to solve this problem. So you end up building these tools which solve that problem without having a conversation with them. And you can think of those tools like a worker, right? A worker that knows how to do this job. And if you build lots of different workers and then you put them all together and get them to solve a much bigger problem, that's what an agent is. That's what an AI agent is. So I do see certainly in the next 12 months, because and they call these things like agentic workflows or AI agents. And what I used to send you as a background reading for this chat was an AI agent. So that went out to the internet and it had a conversation with itself and visited many, many, many different sites to pull together something which was based on. So that's an AI agent. So I think I see that those sort of agents being much more a big thing over the next 12 months and beyond. But I'm just not sure to what degree, because it all comes down to how useful they're actually going to be. And I think that's the key thing, because when I started working on digital transformation projects, I think that like what's happening with AI and large language models now is actually I don't think you have to approach it in any different way than you would have with any digital technology in the past or a business. You have to understand a problem, and then you have to understand the right tool to solve the problem. And then you have to make sure that people are going to actually use the tool that solves the problem. So it's like the same process that you have to go through to get this technology adopted. And it doesn't matter how fancy that agent tool is, or if no one's using it, then it's useless. Yeah. But I think I definitely see that as a growing part. And just to give an example, perhaps as well, I've got a friend, he's been working on this prototype for a game which he designed. And he's been working on this for like 2 years. And he's been using some other tools to sort of rough together a minimum viable product. That's something which businesses who are making products, they'll generally try and get to something which is an MVP, a minimum viable product, and they'll just to get people using it so that they can get feedback and iterate on it. So he wasn't able to get to his MVP until about 3 months ago. And that's because there's these new agents which you can use to write your software for you. And so he's been able to use that agentic software. So he's basically got it to the MVP, and he already has a working application. And he would not be able to finish it himself still. He would still need like the support of a software developer to make sure it's all secure and it can be deployable without bugs and stuff. But he's got something which works. So that's as a result of just agents this year. So I think I can see people who are willing to put a bit of time into that, they'll be able to build stuff for themselves, which is a full stack application which can solve a certain problem for them. It might mean, if you don't like your own, what are they called, CRMs for client management system, maybe you don't like your CRM and you're like, but I only want a CRM which just does this. So you might be able to build your own application which just does that, and that's it. It doesn't have all the other features, and then you won't have to pay, you won't have as many subscription fees and stuff like that. So yeah, that's where I see things heading, certainly in 12 months. But beyond that, I just don't know.
Have you seen other forms of AI being used in environment research, beyond the LLM?
And it's been there for a long time. So, machine learning has been a really fundamental part of science and engineering. Some examples are object detection in images, species identification in images. Because, for example, ecologists work with tens of thousands, sometimes millions of images, which they've got from camera traps and things like that. So that form of AI, machine learning, has been used for quite a long time, and using machine learning for predictions and, modeling and stuff like that. So yeah, certainly more traditional forms. There's always been dedicated expert who are doing that sort of thing in the industry.
Cool. So you say that you are valuable. you are based in Melbourne, right?
So I live about like 3 hours east of Melbourne. So I live out in the regional area. Yeah, out in the country.
3 hours for you, is it near or far?
It's far enough, but I think where I live in Victoria, it's like we don't do stupid amounts of driving. But there are parts in Australia where people drive a lot. But I think for me, I usually just catch the train. There's like regional train services, and if I need to go into the city to have client meetings or something like that. But yeah, I was one of those people who, because in Australia we had quite extended like lockdowns in Melbourne during the COVID times, and so I was one of those people who was outside of the city during that time, and then I never went back. So I was living in the city, but now I live in the country.
Oh, cool. I had some friends from the US coming to Europe and giving me a call telling me, hey, man, do you want to catch up, have a coffee, etc., coming to Europe? Well, for me, first, you don't come to Europe. You come to a country in Europe. And I said, okay, great. Are you coming to France? They say, no, we are coming to Poland. And I said, oh, yeah, but that's another country. Like, I need to take the plane to go to Poland to meet you.
Yeah.
Like, and that's what happens when you live like in a big country that is like almost a continent or is a continent by itself. So you have the different view of like, space and distance, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a difference because our capital cities are so far apart, and I mean, like the distance from Perth to Melbourne is a really long way. So I think in terms of like going into city and traveling, and people regularly drive around Australia, and caravanning and stuff. So I think the perception of distance is probably a bit different, but also, so many people travel here. It's so part of the culture to travel as well. And, because most of us have got families from somewhere else, not either in the current generation or like, my background's from Croatia, and there's a lot of the sort of European immigrants, and then all the other immigrants who have come from everywhere else as well. So there's this connection to somewhere offshore. Yeah.
And where do you see yourself or your company in the near future? What's your ultimate goal?
For me, having a business is more about lifestyle. So I don't have this kind of dream to be exponentially scaling, or, I have started building in the product space. Like I did like a startup course for AI builders. But I sort of realized that I'm not one of those people who would be seeking funding to grow exponentially and stuff. So I think for me, it's more like my purpose revolves around that sort of what's exciting about it and what's creative. And I really like the creative aspect of it. So I thought that I was going to start technical, and now I'm doing less technical things. I feel like I'm kind of following the crumbs a bit just to see where are the services and things that people want. And so it's not apparent to me. But I think where I essentially want to be is, having something where I can, obviously that's a business which is sustainable. I'd like to work with more partners. So it's something I've been doing, working with more technical partners to do more interesting stuff like the sort of image recognition stuff I was telling you about. So I'm interested in that space. So I've got someone who does that. I'd like to do more of those projects. And the agentic space, there's someone local to where I live regionally. So we're both quite interested in working in our own region, in a regional area. And so I'm hoping to do some more stuff locally because it's quite a strong community where I live out in the country. I think it would be a real benefit to have some more people doing this kind of thing in the region. So I'm hoping to do that and get more involved in the community in my area rather than, doing all my work in Melbourne or Sydney or somewhere else. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the broad goals anyway.
Yeah, like 10 years ago, everybody was saying, oh, I would like to scale to be in the next Google, raise funds. But now I'm meeting more and more people telling me, hey, I would like to make a decent living. I don't want to be the richest dad in the graveyard, but I would have a good life, be able to master my time, take time with my family, see my kids growing, travel wherever I want, etc. And you see like priorities shifting. So it's about my life. It's not about like my legacy as an entrepreneur. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, and look, I've been meeting more and more companies, like you say, who are being driven by their values, and I think like values have been, you might just think they're a bit of a joke with especially some of the bigger companies. You're just like, hey, that's great, that's just marketing. But there is an opportunity to actually have a company with values. And I will say that this is something I did use AI for, right? But there was a point where I read this book and it was called Find Your Why or something like that. And it came down to understanding your values. And I'm like, I don't think I really know what my values are. Like, if I really think about it, I'm just like, I don't think they're clear to me. And then there were some other books that I was reading about the idea of, if you're struggling to make decisions, use your values as your guide. So you can do this thing called the flipped interaction with large language models. And essentially what you do is you set them up to ask you questions, not you to ask them questions. You give it a goal. So my goal was I want to discover what my values are, and I want to be really crystal clear on that. So I was just like, keep asking me questions until we reach the point where you can tell me what all my values are. And it took a long time. This conversation went for, I think I was on it for weeks. It's pretty crazy. And because, I had to really think about some of the questions. I had to go away sometimes and just be like, I don't really know. But I did get to the end of that. So I came up with like 12 values. And now I've got a custom GPT set up. And a custom GPT is like a little custom chatbot you train to do a certain thing. And so that little chatbot knows what my values are. So if I'm ever struggling with a decision, I can go to that chatbot and say, I'm struggling with this decision. Based on my values, what do you recommend I should do? And it'll run you down. And it's actually really super useful because, the biggest challenge in running a business without a team around you, or even just, being the head of a business, is like decision fatigue. It's like when the decision finally comes to you, it can be really hard to make decisions sometimes. It takes a lot of energy. So that's one of my strategies to have a true value-based business, really, at the end of the day. Be crystal clear about your value and then make decisions based on those and not other things.
Oh, that's amazing. Like I think like after this episode, I will go and do this exercise. I don't know if I really want to see the answer, but yeah, let's do it.
It's eye-opening. I would recommend for everyone to spend a bit of time. And it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. I was very surprised with how difficult I found it. But now that I've got those, it's like something I can always go back to, and it helps, guide doing certain things as well. So I'd super recommend it.
Cool. And what are, let's say, your current needs, or what are you looking for as a business?
Yeah, so at the moment, I've been focusing on, or probably in the next month or two, I'll be making a concerted effort to focus on local government because the previous client that I had, the session went really well. And essentially, I just brought in sort of environmental engineering and project management use cases to a leadership team. And they were specifically like a sustainability and infrastructure team. So there's 30 leaders there. And so I did a facilitation session and essentially set them up to sort of get moving on their own sort of pilot. So I think that worked really well for that particular client. And in my state, I can't remember how many, there's over 70 local governments and, there's many more in each state. So that's like a focus area for me at the moment. But there's some other stuff as well. I think there's been a bit of this kind of thing coming up. I've got another thing I'm doing next week, which is like a sort of interview. I got asked to talk on a panel, and that's actually through the National University of Singapore, and they've got a centre called the Institute for the Public Understanding of Risk. And so they want to talk about the place that technology has in terms of the public's understanding of risk, and specifically around environmental risk. So I quite enjoy doing stuff like that, and I think I have an underlying hope that somehow I can make that part of my job, in terms of, I don't know, it's fun to just, to talk through ideas and things like that. I don't know if that's possible, but it's just like, that's kind of on my mind. But you got to think about what you enjoy doing and stuff like that, whether it's like, I don't know, it might be working on some project, doing some broader research. And I think there's sort of, when you're kind of putting yourself out there, I think it's good as a business as well, just to be a bit of an open vessel to things that come to you as well. Sometimes it can be a bit unexpected, when certain things come along, you just got to be like, well, I'll give it a go. I've never done it before, but I'll try,
And, like now with all the tracking tools, like we can identify the opportunities easier, and sometimes you are very surprised. I will give you like an example. We were contacted for our core activity at Control Energy, building like sustainable batteries, etc. We've been contacted by a big client, but we never reach out to them. And then when we tracked the flow, we realized that one of their top executives saw a tweet and then went to our YouTube channel and saw one of our interviews, and he commented the stuff, etc. And we built this kind of roadmap of how a tweet ended up being commercial partnership. It was amazing to see how everything will impact. So to get back to your point, always be open and always follow what you to do. I think it's a fair piece of advice to finish this interview. Do you have anything you would like to add?
I think that's a really good point. And I think that this is not something specific to a business leader or a business owner. If you're an employee or if you're a student or anything, it doesn't matter. I think just if you've got something you're interested in, it's sometimes not easy to do it. I was feeling quite nervous about tonight. I'm just like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk for an hour, about something I only partly know about. It's generally always worth it. If you've got something you're interested in, just put it out there. because you just never know where things are going to lead up. And, it's not all about getting work and stuff like that. It might mean some other opportunity, or, you might meet someone that'll lead you on a different path or something like that. But I think using these examples, have a bit of courage and just sort of get out there and sort of share what you're doing. People do want to hear about what you're doing, and it's important. It's really valuable to share stuff. I know it can be a bit hard in the age of social media and stuff like that. It feels like, everyone's out there sharing everything, and you're like, well, why would anyone care about what I'm doing? But I think that's been a bit of a lesson for me.
Exactly. Plus, people tend to get depressed if nobody's liking their content. And I was a little bit like this before, but not anymore, because I realized the power of having the data outside. And, I have one of our partners really depressed about like, oh shit, like I spent a week working on a piece of a nice article, etc. I posted on LinkedIn and I have 2 likes. And then I walked him through our analytics and show him, okay, maybe people are reluctant to give you like this kind of like, etc. because they don't know you. But look at the numbers of like the traffic that your content is generating. And being out there, I think it's for every professional. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but it became a must-have. And if you like it, it's a plus. It's a big bonus. And yeah, that was like a pleasure for me to have you for like an hour and a half. Get to know you, get to know what you do, get to understand, also get educated, because one of the pleasures of having a podcast, like every episode is unique and I learn a lot every single episode. Like, yesterday I did an episode about oysters, and today I'm talking AI. And 3 days ago it was about rainforest. Last month it was about coffee, etc., etc. So it's always great. Look, man, where do people can find you?
So my website's just aiforenviros.com, and you can link through to my LinkedIn from there. That's the main place where to find everything which I'm up to.
Perfect. So we will add in the description of the video like your website, your LinkedIn, etc. So people who are interested are welcome to contact you directly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity, Raouf.
Same here. Thanks a lot. And
right.
See you soon.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
That's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed the episode as much as I enjoyed making it. Ecosystemic is available on all major platforms: YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, and pretty much everywhere. Please support us by subscribing, sharing with people. We try to bring in the show the best guests, providing unbiased and honest feedback about these issues. Don't forget, if you want to take a step further and support us, support Zero, go to nomorezero.com and get yours. It's not only a portable battery, it's a movement. And to get more fun, join the community.lepo.tech, where you will meet passionate people just like you, building together from initiatives to open source projects to supporting our actions. And for that, I can't thank you enough. Until the next episode, see you soon. Bye-bye.